I'm Amory, and I am here with the Amory's Book Club selection for the month of October, which is The Attic Child by Lola Jaye. In The Attic Child, we follow two parallel storylines. One is the story or the POV of a young boy. He's 12 years old. His name is Dikembe, and we move into his story at first in 1903. There's another character far into the future, mostly in the early 90s, 1993, 94, but we go a little into her childhood, which takes place in the 70s. So we have two parallel storylines, and what they have in common is a single attic. Dikembe lives in the Congo. He is very sheltered by his family. He's certain there are secrets that his parents and his brothers are keeping from him. He stays home. He doesn't see a lot of people. It isn't until years later we learn why, and he discovers why. What's happening around him that he doesn't understand is the devastation caused by the Leopold regime, Belgium. So many people, too many people, are unfamiliar with what happened in the Congo under the Leopold regime, Leopold of Belgium. The amount of the loss of human life and suffering, 10 to 15 million people in a period from approximately around the late 1880s to 1908. 10 to 15 million people killed, women, children, men, mutilated. You may have seen all the pictures with men and women and children maimed because slavery. They were forced to work for the rubber, and when people didn't meet their quota, they would lose their limbs, or their children would lose limbs because the father, for instance, didn't meet his quota. And there's a horrifying picture of a man sitting down on like a porch, and he's just staring at his child's feet and hands that were cut off because he did not meet the quota for that day. That's the kind of horror we're talking about. That's the kind of horror that we don't learn about in school. Unfortunately, when it happens to Black and brown people, it just seems as if it matters less through the Western lens. I want to believe that that's changing, but I also think that it's so deeply rooted, people don't even realize that they're doing it because it's not even coming necessarily all the time from a place of maliciousness as far as their cluelessness or their lack of empathy. It's coming from a place of just not relating, not seeing themselves. And so oftentimes when people don't see themselves, they see other human beings as less than human. We saw that in the Ukrainian coverage when some of the reporters just couldn't fathom that this was happening because they're just like, we're just not used to seeing this happening to us. White people are dying, kids. What so many people have known was just on full display there, which is why we did not learn about this. The fact that 10 to 15 million people were killed, genocide and slavery, and perhaps a footnote in so many of our history books. Aside from being a fantastic page-turning book, The Attic Child is really important, but I promise you this is not a trauma fest. We're not doing that here. We follow Dikembe as he is sent away. His parents are saving his life, even though they know that they're sending him somewhere very dangerous. It's not a situation in which he may be facing certain death like the rest of their family. And he's so young, they're able to still protect him, unlike their other children. Dikembe goes with an explorer, and his name is changed to Celestine Babington. Babington is a well-known English explorer who has a lot of idealism. At the same time, he is racist, but he would probably feel like it's not in a malicious way. He takes Celestine in and essentially makes him his pet project, a social experiment, if you will. But because Celestine is treated as a possession, that means he is subject to whatever life may throw at him. And so he has very little to no control over what happens to him in later years. For instance, he lives in the house. He is educated. He is pushed to do all these things that he doesn't actually want to do, never asked for. But again, being part of Babington's social experiment, he has the quote-unquote best of life. But as the story moves on, we see how he ended up in the attic. In the other timeline, we follow the POV of Laura. Laura is a girl who has experienced lots of trauma. She's pretty much alone in the world, and she comes across a photograph in the museum that leads her on a very unexpected journey. So she's dealing with her own trauma, much of which occurred in this very same house, in the very same attic. And as in such stories, we find out as we read how their stories intertwine. The reason why I want to share with you a bit of the author's note By the way, I did cry. You know, I tell you that I don't cry when I'm reading books. Like I have told you when I've gotten a little teary, it happened. No, I full out. I was reading this book, but I also listened to it on audiobooks so I could keep reading as I was doing things, like if I stopped to make some tea or something like that, or lunch. I didn't want to stop reading. I full out like cried. Like I was standing there like, and then I was talking to myself about what happened because I was like, isn't that this? But they were happy tears. They were bittersweet, but they were happy tears. I feel like I need to change the lighting. Like it got way, I need to change the ISO. Pause. The sun is just doing all kinds of things today. So it's like, it'll get really dark and then it'll be really bright. So I think that's good. I'm going to read you 3 parts of this author's note. I'll skip around to a couple of parts. It has always felt like an honor to be in a position to tell stories. Chinua Achebe's quote, "Until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter," resonates with me, particularly as a Black British Nigerian writer. Indeed, the history many of us learned growing up would have us believe the arrival of Black people in England started with the 20th century immigration and the Empire Windrush, and their experience is limited to these. She speaks of going to the Black Chronicles photographic portraits between 1862 and 1948 exhibition. One in particular of a little boy in a clear black and white photograph held my attention longer than the others. His sad expression spoke of an unspeakable experience, of trauma, displacement, the history of colonialism existing in all its guises. I couldn't tear myself away from this photograph, and that day in 2016, he not only captured my gaze, but also my heart. In that very moment, I announced to myself and to my friend beside me, I'm going to write about him one day. There wasn't much I could find out about this mysterious little boy in the photograph. I knew he had once lived in Britain during the 1800s, that his original name was Ndugu Mahali, that he was born circa 1865, and that he died on 28 March 1877 at the age of 12. It is unclear if Tabora in present-day Tanzania was his birthplace, but it was where his fateful journey with the explorer Henry Morton Stanley began. And so, I'm skipping to the end, so The Attic Child wasn't born. It is the longest book I've ever written and the first inspired by a real person, the little boy in the photograph, alive again. While this isn't Ndugu Mahali's actual story, it's his story reimagined. My attempt to give a lion a voice. And so we have Dikembe's story, a story in which a young boy is taken from Africa and thrust into a new world with an explorer. This happened oftentimes. Explorers, for some reason, would find companions with young African boys. You could wonder if there's any subtext there with other things, perhaps. But it was definitely something that was happening. And you would see pictures of, like the picture with Ndugu Mahali, where he's taking a picture in Western clothes, but then he's taking a picture as a wild native with the explorer with his gun, and it's very demeaning. These were taken at a time where so many white people just didn't see Black and brown people as being humans in the same way that they were, it's really mind-boggling, the extent to how human beings in general can Jedi themselves into not seeing other human beings as human beings. Also, I want to say, as we follow Dikembe's story, I love how the author gave Ndugu Mahali reimagined his story. The story does not end in tragedy. I will tell you that now. I'm not going to give you spoilers. The story is a journey. It is a real journey, but it is not, you're not going to have to read all this and say, wow, like with everything that's happening, with everything that's happened, with everything that we're learning, I'm not going to do that to you. And she dedicates the book to Ndugu Mahali and other children that she names, all the children taken, many of whom cannot be named. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful story. I'm glad that it forces this story into the world, into a world that kept it quiet for so long. I also love that quote, the African proverb quoted by Chinua Achebe in The Art of Fiction. Until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Isn't that the truth? Please pick up this beautiful read and join Lola Jaye and I at the end of the month as we chat, the AMERIE'S Book Club chat. You know it's going to be on my Instagram at Amory, but also follow at Amory. Oh, actually, hold the book up. There you go. Also follow at AMERIE'S Book Club on IG and follow along with the hashtags Read with Amory, AMERIE'S Book Club. Until then, I will see you soon. Happy reading. I did that twice because my elbow cracked the first time and it cracked again. So I don't know. You probably will hear that or not. Bye.